Yeah, I don't know where I have to start, but yeah, like the start of like my passion about ice was at the start of the game. So in 2020.
I've lived in New England my entire life, and if there's one thing that so many of us from this region have learned to avoid, it's driving on the ice-covered roads that are all too common during the unpredictable northeastern winters. In the world of Trackmania, where driving on ice-covered roads is becoming more common by the day, many of us, both new and experienced players alike, have the same apprehension for driving on icy roads. Interestingly enough, there are some who not only prefer, but also thrive when it comes to driving on slick, frozen surface that is ice in Trackmania. In this video, we'll be diving into the complex mechanics of one of the most difficult surfaces in the game, and examining the minds and techniques of the drivers that make it look like an art form, as well as the incredibly skilled and creative map makers that create the frozen playgrounds for those drivers who've mastered them. To do my best to understand how myself and other new players can get past the seemingly impossible, inscrutable challenges associated with driving on ice, and why the ice driving community is one of the most passionate that I've seen in Trackmania, I spent the last 6 weeks immersing myself in their world, and I'll be sharing this journey with you today. A story filled with frustration, joy, excitement, and heartbreak, following my progression from driving ice like this to doing things in the game that I never thought I could. I hope you enjoy.
I always say that ice to me is the most satisfying surface in the game when you can drive it somewhat clean. So that's what makes it interesting for me to play a style like ice, where it's so dependent on what your angle is taking into the next turn, or to manipulate a gear to get more exit speed, or to get a more controlled line rather. There's a lot of things you can do on ice in terms of gaining and losing a lot of time. That's what makes ice so different and so difficult for people sometimes. It's very different from the rest of the game, but that's also what makes it super challenging and fun to me.
I don't know why I enjoy like driving sideways, for example. So yeah, I enjoy more the thing that you have to think about what is going on. I really enjoy the thing that we have to manage gears. Like, you have to think about what is happening, you see? At the CRT Trackmania Cup 2020, there was a map called La Reine des Neiges. So it was only ice, and it was very special because I was doing really good on it. And not only in time attack, but also in rounds. I was pretty consistent, actually. I really liked the map. And the fun fact is that, like, the 3-4 days I saw the map, I was like, ah, no, I will never train this. Like, I really wasn't expecting to enjoy this map. But at the end, I really enjoyed since I saw that I was really good on it. So I just continued to play ice after the Desert Cup, and then I never stopped.
Playing ice yourself is just the hardest surface in the game. It's just what it is. But as soon as you get a little bit into it, nailing a run without crashes feels the best out of all. Like, it's the least explored surface in the game, and that's really interesting to me because the gaps are still so huge, and over the last 2 years I've seen new strategies being found, and yeah, it's just super interesting as a whole.
Ice is a hard surface to learn because you have to counter steer in order to go the direction you want to go, and you don't have any grip. So when people first see it, they kind of shit their pants because they don't know what to do. I was able to ask all these questions to these really, really good ice players, and they were able to break it down for me in a way that I wouldn't have been able to understand. One of the reasons why I like it so much is it's such a challenge, and being able to find that line and keep the gear when you're going through a track that somebody else has made, or even the ones that you're making yourself, is super fun to be able to find that optimal line and max out the time.
At its core, Trackmania is like every other driving game. Press the gas to go, brake to stop, turn the wheel to go in the direction that you want to go. You might start off driving on normal road. You'll get a feel for the baseline acceleration, braking, and handling, then maybe make your way onto some black platforms, some large patches of grass or dirt, maybe through water sections, and over one of the more unique driving surfaces in any racing game, plastic. Each of these surfaces has their own sets of behaviors and feelings when it comes to things like acceleration, braking, and traction, but they all share the same properties that we've all come to learn from most racing games we've played. Turn the wheel to steer, accelerate to go in the direction your wheels are facing, and brake to slow down. Now eventually, you'll find yourself driving on ice. As you'd expect, the traction isn't going to be very good, and of course, neither is the acceleration. But everything changes entirely when you approach your first turn. Everything you've learned up until this point goes out the window. I began driving ice a few weeks into my humble Trackmania career, when I was going through the tutorial campaign provided by Nadeo. I use the term tutorial pretty loosely here, as they don't actually tell you anything. They just give you a handful of tracks, many identical in layout, with different surfaces and varying degrees of difficulty. Now, while I wasn't very fast, I was at least getting comfortable at this point driving most of the other surfaces in the game. But as I skipped around and played a bunch of the tracks in a random order, I reached track 23. It quickly became clear that ice was a totally different beast. I struggled for far longer than anybody should have to, simply getting past the first turn. I learned quickly that on ice, you can't simply turn right to go right or release the steering to straighten out. Braking would just make you slide while rendering steering seemingly ineffective. Somehow, the momentum generated by even going moderately quickly into a turn would need to be controlled, but how? All I had at my disposal was 4 inputs: gas, brake, and left and right. And no matter how hard I tried, no combination seemed to allow for me to take a simple turn without sliding off the track into the snow. While many experienced drivers take it for granted, giving advice about all sorts of things I had never heard of or knew how they were relevant, like gearing, sliding out, ice wiggles, dirt snaps, I'd struggled on ice for way longer than I should have before I had been properly introduced to the most basic of ice driving skills, a mechanic known as the ice slide.
An ice slide is basically turning your car to be almost 90 degrees or more, and then countersteering to initiate acceleration through a turn.
After some practice, I had become comfortable with initiating the ice slide, starting to develop the muscle memory required to get a remotely decent approach into the turn. I got used to carrying the momentum of the rear of the car into the turn and then quickly countersteering. But after that, the rest felt like a mystery. On most other surfaces, if you're going too wide, you can release the throttle, as well as increase the amount you steer into the turn to tighten your line. Now, if you aren't going wide enough, you can release your steering and try to accelerate to straighten out through the exit. Now, in both cases, trying this on ice would alter the countersteer that I was trying to hold, once again putting me into the snow. The only thing I could conclude at this point was taking the turn correctly would require the perfect entrance angle along with perfect timing on the slide. Basically having to YOLO yourself into the turn, simply because the normal ways that I would control the car through corners simply didn't work. Seeing my struggles, once again the Trackmania community would come to my rescue. The turning point for my progression came when I read the single most important chat message in my ice driving journey. Tap the brake to tighten the slide. Now, historically, on other surfaces, braking while in mid-turn or while exiting a turn would only be necessary if I really fucked up a line. But as obvious as it might seem to any of you watching, the idea to do this while ice sliding had simply never crossed my mind. It was after hearing that advice that I had the weirdest epiphany I've ever had in Trackmania, completely changing the way I understood ice driving. It almost feels like what you're doing is switching. Like gas and brake becomes steering and countersteering. And then brake and letting off accelerator becomes like left and right. It's what it feels like. Like you're swapping the steering wheel and the gas. While not exactly the most accurate way of describing the behavior, all at once, paradoxically, my understanding had simultaneously gotten turned completely upside down, while at the same time becoming oddly intuitive. This was the exact moment that my ice driving experience had truly begun.
Depends on whether or not you need to go tight around the turn or what you need to do after that to set up for the next ice slide. But generally, you want to do some brake taps if you want to go tighter. And if you want to exit the ice slide more soon, you can release your throttle so that your car doesn't have a chance to continue the acceleration and it can exit the ice slide. It'll start to straighten out.
As I began to consume more Trackmania content on YouTube, which, like most of us, almost exclusively consisted of watching videos from Virtual, as I dug a little bit deeper to try to find some ice driving content to help support my learning, I came across a couple videos by Flink talking about something called the Icy Campaign.
This might be the one, the most satisfying Trackmania video out there. Well, at least for me. In the beginning of the year, we remade the official Trackmania winter campaign into full ice.
When starting the game, I really hated that Nadeo actually put ice on the new game. I played a bit of TMNF and TM2 and older games, and I just thought, why did they just add ice? It doesn't really fit a racing game. But as you see, it somehow got stuck to me, and now it's my favorite style. Most of the time I play ice, like it's really taking most of the time when I'm playing Trackmania. For me, ice mostly was my favorite style because I couldn't show off on other styles. Many great players already are on tech, on dirt, on other surfaces. So ice was a new thing, and I just discovered it and tried to improve. And I started ice on Chem 2. So I was a Chem 2 player and just started seeing Icy Campaign. I don't know if you already heard of it from Flink. He always puts the normal campaign into ice. and I started with the most weird map ever. Icy Winter 2021, map 25. Yeah, I hunted that map till I got WR. Took me like 25 hours. That was the first time I got an Ice WR, and it was actually beating Mika. So I was really proud of it. And everything in Camp 2. I have to say I just got the WR or held the WR till the end because Mika already was really strong, and I proudly told him about getting his WR, and he tried to beat it back, and it took him like 4 hours to have a better run, but he got a sad landing bug at the end, so he lost it. Yeah, actually he would have hold the WR at the end, but he just let it for me. I told him I played like 25 to 30 hours, and he said like, yeah, okay, with that determination, I think I maybe let this map WR for you.
So the Icy campaign is a bit of a phenomenon under the ice styles, I would say. And I started it about 2 years ago, and I didn't plan to make it a thing. I just thought, wouldn't it be fun to just remake the 25 normal campaign tracks into full ice and see if they are still possible to finish? And yeah, people liked it. They liked to see how the maps turned out and what challenges were now in the maps that you wouldn't have thought about. And right in the beginning, I decided that I will tweak little parts of the maps that are very close to impossible, because there's other campaigns that do that as well, and then you have always the same trick. You have to climb up to the stadium and then somehow fly down again. So I make them a little bit possible, but overall they are just maps that are converted into full ice. And yeah, people liked it. Second time, I asked people to donate some money for the best players. And some people did. I think we started with $100 or something. And 6 seasons later, we had one where there was like a $3,000 prize pool for the season. And in Trackmania terms, that is really high, under the top 10, I would say. From the beginning, I just wanted to bring some love to the ice surface. And I know it kind of had some split reviews, I would say. Some people hate the tracks for good reason. They are really janky and bad, but on the other hand, they are super interesting. And this puzzle element I mentioned before is there on almost all maps, and that just makes it so fun every season again to look at the tracks and see what kind of challenges and obstacles are in the maps again. And I think that's why people come back to the ice campaign every time, and also happen to donate their hard-earned money for the best drivers, which is really cool to me.
Flink started the IC campaign during the fall season of 2020, if I'm right. I wanted just to play the campaign because first it's a funny idea. Like he just took the campaign and remade it into full ice. So I was just like, okay, I'm gonna try. And I remember like the very first campaign, like there was no cash prize. It was I don't know if it was a competition actually. And at the end he decided to put some prize pool. And after this, I just continued to play the campaign. First because I really liked it, and second because of course the prize pool was still interesting to get. I hunted pretty much 2 maps during an IC campaign. And on these 2 maps, I was around 5 seconds ahead of the top 2. And the only reason is that I wanted to get close to the perfect run, you see. Like my 2 favorite maps are IC Summer 17 and IC Summer 21 from 2021. The thing that I like with IC campaign is that the maps are not made to drive them on ice, so you have to think about the gears, you see. The next IC summer will be the 2 years of the IC campaign. So if I win the IC summer that is coming, this will be like 2 years that I'm winning this competition. As always, if Elcon is trying like for real or not, because he can compete with me, and if I don't have time to play, he can beat me. But if I'm here, then I will try everything to defend my spots.
Yeah, it's definitely very unique because the maps are not meant to be like that, you know. They have some really unique parts. It's just something you would never see in a normal map because the parts are just uncalculated. You have to find like unique ways of doing them. Just something that you would never see otherwise. So that's what got me interested. Pretty cool that the prize money is like really big for a campaign that isn't really meant to be serious. It's really cool that there's a lot of prize money and people are kinda interested into it. Kinda enjoyed 21, to be fair. It brought some interesting water to ice transitions. I kinda learned stuff about water on that map that I would probably never look into if it wasn't for that. Like water bounces with wet wheels, where you like bounce more if you have less wet wheels. It's kind of weird to explain. Basically, the less wet wheels you have, the faster you bounce on water. That's what I learned on that map.
The more I searched for different kinds of ice tracks to hone my skills on, taking recommendations from community members with a wide array of preferences, it quickly became obvious that, much like what I learned from my deep dive into full-speed driving I discussed in my previous video, the number of different styles of ice tracks was seemingly endless, very much like the sheer amount of unbelievably high-quality, community-driven content that was available. It was time to look at all of the different options and perhaps pick my poison.
So for example, you have technical ice. So it's basically, usually it's with the road borders. You have to time your releases properly. There's a lot of braking, high angle sliding. It's a very interesting style of ice. It's getting pretty popular nowadays because it's the closest, to me, it's the closest that ice will come to real competitiveness, because the gaps are usually like quite big on some ice maps, because tiny mistake on ice can lose you a lot.
The reason why it's called tech is because most of the time when it's not ice, those particular blocks are gonna be used on like a tech track. Yeah, it's actually my favorite style of ice, just because of how satisfying it can be. The term basically stems from using the converted roadblocks that Flink has made, and it really does lead to like a technical line and understanding of ice to be able to get through a map made with those blocks, because the way that they're shaped and the different ways that you have to drive it in order to get through the lines, the slides actually in a good speed. You really need to know where to set up and when to brake tap. Skarzer's technical ice map from a few days ago. That one, you really need to, like, if you don't get a good first starting slide, then you might as well just restart, especially if you're going to go for like a top 100 time or something like that.
I'm also really a fan of ice full speeds, but there's not that many maps that really go into that style. There was Ski Freak Ice Full Speed, which I really enjoyed. You have the normal full speed, which relies heavily on the loops and all the like wall rides and stuff, and doing them in ice really brings a new perspective to that, and it just comes out really challenging, and I enjoy that.
I really like full speed ice. It's kind of taboo, if you will, just because when you think full speed, you think grip and speed drifting and whatnot. But an ice full speed, it's really just about minimizing steering inputs, which goes the same with full speed. If you wanted to, like, instead of like oversliding and whatnot, you don't want to steer too much. A good full speed ice track that would come to mind would be Wild Rush by Chroma, featuring Psycho Edge. That one is super fun. It has some good speed checks on it. So it raises quite at the challenge for people.
The bobsleigh, it brings some pretty cool things with it. Basically, bobsleigh is usually about driving in between the red lines and holding either a certain percentage of steering on your controller or using an action key on your keyboard or D-pad. I would say 40% steering is the most optimal steering for a bobsleigh.
I actually really do like bobsleigh maps, despite popular opinion about bobsleigh. I'm a huge fan of them if it's done correctly, and I think people should do it more. That's actually my favorite bobsleigh map, and when it came out, I immediately put it on the beginner server, hoping that like people would like it and play it. I was really happy when it got Cup of the Day as well. The map had been out for like 4 or 5 months before then, so I had a good time like to practice the map beforehand, and then during the qualifiers on the Cup of the Day, the first cup, I was able to be first in the world after like my first run, and then everybody started figuring it out.
This is Frozen Waste. It's August 1st map. I think it was like the LoL Cup of the Day, but it was very different from other LoL Cup of Days. A lot longer and a bit less like random things happening. So much of it is just tricks that aren't even a thing anymore, where you could do back hit and it would give you a zoop. I think what it was, like from what I could gather, was that because there was like acceleration penalty changes in an update, and on ice, but I think it reversed the effect of acceleration penalty. So instead of slowing you down by 1%, it sped you up by 1%. So then you could get that, and then it would just like launch you at whatever times the speed you had going into the clip. I made a trial map, and I trial map with like a few checkpoints using it, so that broke with the update, but it's a pretty good decision because a lot of the ice maps, especially like icy campaign maps, were ruined by it since they all have barriers close to the line. So you could just like go to the barrier and get like a 150 speed boost if you got a good zoop there, which isn't great for grinding. There was some random person, I don't know who it was, it wasn't the streamer guy, it was just some random person that got like a 47-second time with the cut. I remember Elcon, he had gotten it. I had like world record without the cut, I think from the day before, and in the morning of, Elcon had gotten world record, and I grinded it like 4 hours before Cup of the Day happened, and I got it with like an hour left or something, after grinding basically the entire time other than like sleeping.
I often do wallbangs where other people don't really like to do them because, for example, on the icy campaigns, this last campaign I did one on the first and second map. The second map, Mika also did this, but on the first map I got WR with it because it's quite random but still manageable to get quite consistent, and I really like it because it gains speed. I always like the weird stuff of like mechanics, not like the typical ice player maybe, I don't know. The most favorite part of ice for me is still like the weird stuff. I'm more like the like abusing wallbangs or crazy zoops. There were a time where updates made it possible to zoop if you have certain angles at wall banks. So that was my favorite thing to do. I always like the tricky games, like.
There is this feeling about wide open ice that that is better for like track of the day style maps. People don't really have to think about where they slide, when they release, how much braking they have to do. They just play the map, they slide left, right, and it's just easier for them to just play, even though it's probably less exciting for us ice players to play a map like that. You can definitely define lines on those wider ice maps. It's the challenge with those maps is finding and seeing the lines. So in a way, it is also like a fun challenge as an ice player to test yourself into finding the lines. So where can I get a little bit more exit speed, or where can I get a better entry? Where can I get a better angle on my slide so I get more speed throughout this corner? Those kind of things. Where do I have to release less so I can gain more time? Those kind of things are the most interesting parts about the wider style of ice.
Then there's a lot of maps that are fun because of the scenery, just because of the scenery. I like the scenery. I like, as I said, I'm here for the creativity and the user content, so the scenery speaks a lot to me, even if the tracks are sometimes more basic, like the HTMH Snowfall map is great. The bridge is great by Ellipse. I don't know, they just transport you into a different world. They made the maps so beautiful.
I also really enjoy really clean maps. Some of them get a Cup of the Days or Track of the Days from Nightwolf or Ellipse. These are some mappers of custom ice blocks. They make them themselves and have like a scenery of really clean environment, like in between the oceans or something. And I think also these maps are really worth it to showcase, because those maps are the best to drive on, even for not really good ice players, because the gears are well calculated and you can finish runs like easier, not like on Icy Campaign where you have to bounce over a CP like on 25 winter. Yeah.
To some of the people that inspired me most, one of them is Henk is me. Not only because he's also Dutch, but mainly because it's super strange, but Henk is me has a very similar style to me, but he always finds this little bit of extra touch to his maps that make them interesting, which I usually don't do because I'm scared of changing a certain section and basically ruining my whole map. But he always seems to make it work. He's like he takes the risk and it pays off in his maps. He has also been a great inspiration for me and great help in previous maps. They're good friends of mine, Nightwolf and Ellipse. We've worked together on previous maps. And whenever I need their assistance or whenever I need their help with something on a map, if I ask them to work together on something, they're always like open to listen and they're always open to help me. There's more people to this that always help me if I need them. So I'm super grateful for that. They're super nice guys.
The game is fully arcade style, so the things I like the most is when it fully embraces this style. And first of all, that means loopings and turnovers and stuff that you have in Fullspeed. That is pretty unusual for other racing games, so those are really cool. Every 12-year-old loves loopings, and yeah, you never grow out of that. And the 360s on ice are basically the same category. How cool is it to pull off a 360 on a map and it also being the fastest way? It's like, it's a dream. Super cool to watch and to play. What's not to love about 360s?
Once the 360s came into like the view, that's where I was like enjoying it the most, because that was some really like cool tricks that you could do on ice. The spins where you exit the like a platform in one way and then you land on a different platform in like the opposite way, you know. You start it on the ground but you do it in the air itself. Yeah, that's like the main thing on Borpa spin, if you know the map. Those are the 360s I'm talking about that I really like.
Definitely the most wicked person is Burly Pog. I don't know what that guy does to his ice, but he makes super wicked things with ice, which I didn't even know that were possible. From the start, he has been a huge inspiration to me. He's been out there longer than I have, and what he does to ice, like I mentioned it before, is that is crazy. It shows that ice has, let's say, no limits to what you can do with it in terms of how wicked the game can be with if you build it well. Like there's one person in this ice community that builds the absolute best spins, and that's Burly Pog.
After learning about many of the different styles of ice tracks, there were a few that stood out to me as the most exciting I wanted to try to learn, and to challenge myself to get better. Those being the more quote-unquote wicked maps, perhaps trial or even endurance. Given that I was already in the midst of planning on making a video of my progression on ice, I thought these sort of tracks would be perfect. Exciting driving with a handful of really cool tricks. Perhaps a bit overzealous at this point, I was already excited to find what would ultimately become my final boss, the ultimate challenge for this project. Given that I enjoyed seeing what was done with the maps created by Burly Pog, the first track that a handful of community members had mentioned was Dank 69. I decided to check it out. As soon as I loaded the map and looked at the leaderboards, I had quite the reality check. But fuck it, might as well give it a try. What is this camera? What have I done? Alright. God. Fuck. Okay. Fuck. Fuck! God. Fuck. Okay. Shit. Fuck! Fuck. Shit. Fuck! Yes! Yes! Wait! Woo! Alright, it's safe to say that this track might not have been the best option for someone of my skill level. Now, a few other community members had suggested a much more accessible version of this kind of track, called Gengar, and I decided to check it out. As soon as I began to explore the track, trying to get familiar with it, taking a look at a few of the replays on the leaderboards, a few folks had mentioned that this would likely be a bit too ambitious for someone like myself. Challenge accepted. It was at this very moment that I had found my final boss. The first step here would be learning the general route, which I was able to break down into 10 major sections. After a short beginning, we hit the first stretch of ice, where you need to do a relatively shallow angled slide past some poles and then over 2 gaps, ending with a 90-degree right-hand slide over 1 more gap, landing on some asphalt and through a checkpoint. A sweeping left-hand uphill slide through the next checkpoint, then 1 more left turn, this time downhill with a transition, followed by a right-hand slide into the next section. And getting the previous lines right is far more difficult than it looks, but this next section was an escalation of force that I wasn't expecting. Reactor boost down through a water section, hitting a jump onto a dirt platform, over another jump through 2 small gaps, hitting an engine off trigger in mid-air, disabling all acceleration, at which point we land on an ice platform with a booster that's facing in the wrong direction. Hitting this booster normally will slow you down enough to prevent you from making this transition. So interestingly enough, the strategy is to spin the car 180 degrees so you're moving backwards over the booster, which unintuitively avoids the speed penalty. Now this is not only important for the jump right after, but it's necessary for the next section, which is a doozy. This section introduces what is arguably the defining element of what makes this track so difficult. Most of the checkpoints on Gengar are such that if you make a mistake right before them, sliding out or crashing into a wall leaving you with a very bad entry or even no speed, You can still do a standing respawn at the checkpoint and still have enough speed to be able to progress to the next checkpoint. Having checkpoints that are respawnable is pretty much required for anybody that isn't an ice pro to have any chance of making it to the end. As you might have guessed, the remaining checkpoints are, in fact, non-respawnable. Entering one of these checkpoints without the requisite speed or angle will result in it effectively being impossible to continue the run. You won't be able to make it to the next segment of the track no matter what you do. You can't go forward and you can't go back. Your only option is to reset entirely. Now, our one saving grace here is that Scarzor indicates which checkpoints are respawnable and which are not by putting two different colored lights next to each, green being respawnable and orange, of course, is not. This at least gives us a chance to take as many attempts as we need to hit these non-respawnable checkpoints cleanly. As we approach the next checkpoint, we need to slide at just the right angle and speed, ensuring we don't make contact with the checkpoint itself, so that we can hit a transition onto a downward slope before a large jump onto an icy platform with one more gap into the final checkpoint of this section. As we start this section, we're introduced to the first of many bounces off of a plastic wall, which allows us to quickly rebound off of the wall, angling the car and front tires in just the right way that we can carry that momentum to set us up nicely for the next turn. We then come to a stretch beginning with a turbo booster followed by a reactor boost down, over a gap onto an ice platform with a reset block followed by an engine off block, and then onto another reverse turbo booster transition. Over some boosters and a few more gaps into a section of Bobsleigh, a number of backwards boosters through a checkpoint before one more right hand onto asphalt where we need to once again spin the car to be able to make it over the backwards facing boosters. Finally, we come to another pair of boosters, speeding us up considerably and flinging us down into the water where a reset block causes us to pop out of the water into the final checkpoint of this section. Beginning with a plastic bounce, followed by a sloping uphill turn, we come to one of the most confusing and challenging parts of the track to do correctly. The intended strategy is to navigate around these poles with some precise spins onto a section of dirt, where entering at just the right angle with the correct inputs causes the car to very rapidly accelerate and turn 270 degrees through a reactor up ring, a reset ring, onto an icy platform where we need to do another 180-degree turn, triggering another reactor up, at which point we can hit a jump to make it over the final large gap. After we land on the platform, we need to ice slide to the right, off of a ledge, spinning the car such that it lands appropriately on a segment of reverse boosters, allowing us to roll backwards, bouncing off of some plastic, giving us enough speed to boost over the gap, hitting an engine off trigger before we hit a huge jump, flinging us into the ceiling before a water section followed by a reactor down and an ice loop leading to our next checkpoint. This section begins with another plastic bounce, allowing us to rebound perfectly into a backwards sideways slide where we hit another tricky section with spins through some poles, another dirt snap into a plastic bounce, setting us up for the next portion of this section. After we take a left and straighten out over a segment of plastic before the checkpoint, we hit a booster followed by a bit of water right before a plastic section with a ring checkpoint, through which we need to bug slide at the right angle so that we can land on the next ledge, avoiding hitting a set of poles on the left. Now once we land that, we hit another checkpoint leading into a large loop, setting us up to bounce off of the water on our nose for a backwards landing right before the final checkpoint of this section. Now this is arguably the most difficult section in the entire run. First, we need to do a quick 180 before the ledge puts us onto a booster, leading into a section with a number of bobsleighs. The added speed the booster gives us before this section is more of a liability than an asset, as it, coupled with our icy wheels, makes it extremely difficult to hit the right angle where we can land on the bobsleigh without losing all control over our car. As we'll quickly find out, this is quite important, because we need to hit this tall right-hand bobsled section perfectly so that we can set up properly for a half-pipe transition. Getting the right angle with enough speed is critical here because we'll be transitioning at an awkward angle onto another platform right before a narrow, non-respawnable checkpoint. Once through this checkpoint, we'll hit one forward booster followed by two backwards boosters, requiring us to do another 360-degree spin off of a ledge, bouncing off of the water at just the right angle to propel us over a gap onto a section of dirt and asphalt where we need enough speed to collide into a small ledge, which will cause the car to backflip into a disorienting landing on a ceiling of inverted magnets before we roll backwards down an icy half-pipe where we have to remain backwards for most of the reverse booster to maintain enough speed as we spin 180 degrees to land straight before we hit a ledge transition leading into the checkpoint marking the final section of the track. Although this section begins with a relatively simple, wide right-hand ice slide, what makes it deceptively difficult is that it begins with a cruise control block, which limits our speed to whatever it was when we triggered the block. Now, normally this isn't too challenging, but on ice, that means we lose a massive portion of our control over our ice slide. Releasing our countersteer will almost definitely lead to us sliding out off of the ledge, and given that the gas pedal is effectively locked in place, the only control we really have here is to use brake taps to tighten our slide. There's no reliable way to correct if we happen to tighten our slide too much, so hitting the brake too little or too much is going to force us one of two ways off of the ledge. We need to tap the brakes just enough to perfectly angle our slide so that we can straighten out by snapping off of a plastic block right before the final checkpoint in the run. Now naturally, this final checkpoint is non-respawnable, so as soon as we enter it, that means there's no going back. With the cruise control effect still active, we need to have enough speed to go through the checkpoint straight, hitting a few more boosters into a half loop, yeeting us onto another nose bounce in a pool right before a backwards landing onto an uphill, through a waterfall, into the finish. Well, okay, seems easy enough, right? It's fucking easy, dude. Here was my initial prediction after seeing the route for the first time. That means it's going to take me 45 minutes to complete it once and 75 fucking respawns. Now I grinded this track for an entire day, memorizing the route and killing countless runs with bad entries into every single one of the non-respawnable checkpoints. The Fullspeed god Amaterasu summed up the pain I was feeling at this point quite nicely.
Also, Scarzo is the worst ice mapper in existence.
Now, amazingly enough, my initial prediction wasn't too far off. It took me over 3 hours of attempts to complete this track in its entirety, with an ending time of just under 47 minutes. Now, what's worse is that although this track consisted of 27 checkpoints, my first completed run had a total of 463 respawns. In order to get a respectable run, one with a time that I'd be proud of, I was going to need to seriously hone my car control, learn all of the tricks and mechanics, and develop the muscle memory needed to survive a battle with Gengar. And at this point, I wasn't sure what my end goal would be, but it was painfully obvious that I had work to do. If you enjoyed this video, consider giving it a like and subscribing to my channel so that you won't miss out on the next and final installment of my Ice Saga, where the pros will break down the most advanced ice driving mechanics and where I undergo a serious training regimen to try to crush my goals, training that was ironically designed by the very creator of this new enemy of mine, and in my hubris decide to take the challenges I subjected myself to the next level, making my goals more and more ambitious, adding challenge after challenge, and even deciding to add one more enemy to my fight. A fight that I was already losing. Gengar's little brother. I'll see you next time.